Hi and welcome to the first in the series of superannuation basics. I'm Scott Trevethan, founder and managing director of Go Global Bookkeeping. I'm also a certified financial planner and a licensed self-managed super fund auditor. So there should be some things that I know about superannuation, and this course or mini course is all about superannuation, giving you an idea of what it is and what it's about. So without any further ado, let's kick off to some superannuation basics. And now what you're going to learn in this lesson is the origin of the name superannuation, what it means from a legislative and an Australian environment's perspective, you know, how it fits into our society, and when it became compulsory. So just those are the main things that we're going to learn in this first lesson. So first of all, the origin of the term superannuation. So it's from a Latin term, which is super, annus. So super meaning on and spread out over a year, and annus meaning annual as well. So what it was designed to mean was a payment that was made over a period of time. That's the terms. That's where the origin of the word superannuation is. It's actually from a term that the Australian business uses called a superannuant. The origin of that term, superannuant, is to do with redundancy. And this is quite horrible, but if something is made redundant because of its age, then it's a superannuant. And that superannuant is then extended on to people in our workforce, and they're considered to be superannuated out of the workforce because they are too old and no good anymore. So that's the origin of the term superannuation. Of course, it's come to mean something completely different in the Australian environment. Now, Australia, since its very early days, has had a thing known as the age pension. Now, the age pension was meant to help you in those years between when you gave up work and when you were no longer able to work and you had to retire from the workforce, and when you ultimately died. Now, it used to kick in around about the age of 60, and sometimes a little bit earlier if you were in the public service or work for a hospital. So if you're in a government job or work for a hospital, it sometimes kicked in earlier, but around about when you were 60, and that's when the average person was going to die, the average male, and that was the average person in the workforce, would die at age 67. So it was only meant to cover for up to 7 years of your life. It was a very minimal amount. So it was just paying for the basic necessities, which might cover your rent and your bread and milk, but not going out, not very much money in addition to that. What's happened with Australia though, we've got a very small population, but it's growing population, and it's also growing older population. So we haven't got enough young people to pay taxes to fund the old people. So this is considered a very, very serious problem back in as early as 1950 and 1960, when we recognised that the country was going to be in real trouble and we wouldn't be able to pay these age pensions anymore. So they started talking about a new environment, which was called the superannuation environment. And that essential premise of the superannuation environment was where people would contribute from their own salaries during their lifetime to a pool of funds that they would be able to draw on when they retired. And that would help either supplement the age pension that the government gave or replace it completely. Now, since that time in the 1950s and 60s, when it was first started to be talked about, it's got more and more complex, and it's grown to be one of the largest financial sectors of the Australian market. So with trillions and trillions of dollars invested in it. So it started officially in Australia in 1992. And I remember this very well because I was an accountant working for a building and construction company that was building all sorts of pipelines in New Guinea and in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, probably even in the Philippines. I was really excited, but I was based in Melbourne, and this new legislation came in, and it was like, oh my goodness, I've just studied all these years to learn all of this stuff about tax, and here's a brand new regime that's come in. And in those days we had big chunky video cassettes that we had to watch. So trust me when I say you're in a privileged position just listening to this video but it started back in 1992, which is, as you know, a long time ago. the federal government introduced what's known as the current superannuation scheme, and it was a compulsory scheme. Now, prior to 1992, there was a period where high net worth individuals could invest some of their surplus income into their own superannuation funds. And in addition to that, we also had government employees that were covered by what's known as a defined benefit plan. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but some of them were covered for superannuation as well. But in 1992, it became compulsory for all employers to contribute superannuation funds on behalf of their employees. So why it became compulsory was because we were living longer. So 67 is no longer the age that you're going to die in Australia in. That age is now pushed up to 80 for men and 85 for women. And as you might be aware, that's going up all the time. Now, that's good news for those of us who want to, towards that end of their life. But for people who have to pay tax and, making sure that we've got enough money to live on in our retirement when we're not earning income, then that can be a real problem. So that's why the superannuation scheme came in then and was compulsory. And we've also had a change to that retirement date. So it used to be that people retired at either age 55 or age 60. That's pushing further and further out, and I'll explain more of that, what that means. But from an age pension perspective, if I wanted to get the age pension because I didn't have superannuation, I would have to work up to the ripe old age of 67 in order to be eligible for the age pension. So you can see how that's pushing further and further out. Now, not too long ago, that was the date that I was expected to die. So obviously things are getting, people are living longer, which is good news, I guess, in the whole scheme of things. So I was just going to say just one other thing. Before 1992, there certainly was a sense of entitlement in Australia, and this has sort of coloured our thinking around the superannuation environment, especially in those early years. The sense of entitlement was that I paid tax my whole working life, and the tax rate used to be as high as 60 cents in the dollar. So it was a very high tax rate in Australia because we had such a small population and such a large country that needed roads and infrastructure and hospitals and things like that. So we used to pay a lot of tax. I'm not complaining about it. We're a very lucky country. But we used to pay a lot of tax. And there was a sense that, well, when you retire, you're entitled to the pension because you'd pay taxes all your life, and now it's your chance to get some of those taxes back, and they can pay you a little bit of a salary to stay at home. But we've had a sense, as I mentioned before, Australia couldn't afford that. So we now needed to move to a system that meant that not only was I going to pay taxes, albeit less taxes during my lifetime, I'm now going to have to fund, part of my salary is going to need to be hived off and allocated for my retirement purposes when I reach the ripe old age of 65 or above. I'll explain that in a future lesson. So the new era, that's the new era of superannuation. So this concludes the introduction to superannuation and the general environment. Key things to remember on this is that compulsory super started in 1992, that there's two different things when we're talking about superannuation, which is the payment that a worker pays into a fund, and I'll explain how that works in a future lesson, and the age pension, which is still in existence for those people that don't have any super or have enough superannuation. Okay, so as long as you've got those concepts nailed, go on to lesson number 2.